G'day all, welcome to Southern Cross Amateur Astro. I'm Mark and I'll be taking you through another user guide for astrophotography tools. And in this one we're going to be looking at the various APT settings. So this might be a bit of a long video, so I'll get straight into it. Okay, accessing APT settings is quite simple. You've got a button down here on top of your log. There's one on your Tools tab, or you can just use the Alt-S shortcut, which will open it up as well. And that brings up this screen. As you can see, there's a number of different tabs, and we'll just work through them one at a time. I'll put timestamps in the description so you can go to the various chapters to see whichever one you need. Up the top here is one for working with your profiles. I'm going to leave that to its own separate videos because I do like talking about profiles and how to set them up and how to use them properly. So that'll be its own separate video, and I'll come back to that at another time. But now we're going to start on the main tab, which is the first one that comes up, and this is just some basic overall settings for APT. Here, as you can see, you can change your skin color. Just note that anything that's marked with an asterisk, as skin color is here, needs to restart APT to take effect. But you have a number of skin colors there. 4.60 added purple. I've had a look at it. It's a bit leery for me, but you might like it. So you select your skin color there, but for it to take effect you will need to restart APT. Now the next line is for change icon color. And what this does, if it's checked, it will change the colour from the default orange icon you get with APT to match the colour of your skin. But that's when it's working. I noticed, and I mentioned to Ivo today, they aren't actually changing colour at the moment. So Ivo's going to have a look at that one. But when it does happen, it might not be much, but if you're running multiple camera, multiple instances of APT for multiple cameras or whatever, it's a handy way to tell which camera you're working with by having a different skin color and a different icon color for each. Now the position for your status panel, this is the panel on the left over here. By default it is vertical on the left. It has the option to choose vertical in here, which will leave it exactly as it is, or you can choose horizontal, and that will change it so it actually runs across the bottom down here of your screen between the log and your preview window. So that's an option you have. I'll just leave it on auto for now. Language support, if you're using Japanese or traditional or simplified Chinese, you can change it so everything's in that language. If you have it on auto, it just leaves it up for the system to do things like your file names and everything else in that particular language, whatever your system set at. Now if you're running Windows 7 or earlier, you can try and use the old style interface. It does a couple of different things. It has problems in Windows 10 and I'm assuming in Windows 11. I haven't tested it, but you have things like a floating window when you're to monitor APT when you minimize it, etc. But that's the older style interface if you want to try that, if you're still running Windows 7 or earlier. Next we have the tooltips button. This just turns tooltips on or off. I don't bother checking it because up the top here you have this little eye on the button there, and that itself turns tooltips on and off. At the moment I've got it turned off, so it does nothing. If I hit the eye, I get my tooltips. So that's how I do it, so I don't worry about enabling it in here. Now no thumbnail, the next three are all for the image browser, pardon me. No thumbnails in the image browser. With that activated, instead of getting like I've got images here, you'll just get a box that says no thumb. So that's what that does. It gets rid of any actual images. Hiding folder is a little bit different. You will see the images if you haven't checked the no thumbnails, but usually when you hit the up button you get the folders listed. With that checked, you do not get the folders listed. The only way to get to another folder is to shift click on the button here, and oops, that's the wrong one, sorry. Shift click opens the folder. Click on the one here, you get a pop-up box where you can actually select the folder you want to go to. So I could go to that one, select OK, and it will take me to that folder. So that's what that one does. And the other one's just the order of your folders in your image browser. Do you want them to go ascending order or descending? That's up to you. Then you have the observer name. This can be whatever you like to enter in it. This is used in FITS headers and things like that. So put whatever you like in there. I've got SCAA, Southern Cross Amateur Astro, and that works for me there. I'll leave what's under that until a little bit later because it's to deal with this side over here. Now, live view automation, when it's enabled, is APT's method of trying to optimize your live view for your camera, depending on what camera you're using. If you're using a DSLR, it will set the ISO to maximum and a 30-second exposure. If you're using a CMOS or CCD camera, it will set it to the maximum bin. So that's if you want to use that. If you're not using that, it just uses the numbers you have in the camera tab. I prefer doing it that way so I don't enable it. The next one is a maximum ISO. If you're using a DSLR, the maximum ISO to use, because modern day DSLRs are getting 25, 50,000 is becoming common, and you don't need to go that high, so you might want to set a limit of say 6400 or whatever as the maximum ISO it will use when live view automation is enabled. If you're running a Canon camera, they have a custom function for mirror lockup. Checking this box allows APT to take control of the mirror lockup. Just note that if you're running Magic Lantern or something similar, the custom firmware, it will not work with this, as it controls the mirror lockup. So you either have to do it manually in the camera using Magic Lantern or uninstall Magic Lantern. But that's if you're using a Canon DSLR. Now, if you're using a really old DSLR, you may need to use a cable to shutter cable to run it. And this is if you're using that, you just check this bottom button and it will use that cable. There is a description on the user guide for making these cables if you need one. So if you need one, go and have a look. But it's really only for old, very old cameras, and some of the older Nikons especially need them. But if you need one, you enable that. The next you have is your image path. This is the top folder for your image storage for your images. It can be whatever you like. The default is C APT images. This is a simulator one, so I've told it to put them in a simulator folder. You can browse and choose whatever folder you want to use for it. So I can cancel that because I'm not changing it, but that's what that one is. And the next these two buttons are for the naming of the folders and the naming of the actual files themselves. And if you click on them, they both work the same way. You can pick and select. It has a number of settings in here. The camera number must always be there, and it must be the first number. You cannot move, unlike everything else, you cannot move it down or anything else. It's always the top one. And then you can pick and choose what information or what folders you want. Date is a recommended one. I stopped using that quite a while ago. What you see here is basically how I've got it set up. So camera number, then I have the camera name, so I know what camera I'm using with it. Particular scope, I've got several scopes, so it'll be under the camera under each scope. What the object is, what type of plan, light, dark, flats or whatever, the filter used for that plan with the next folder, and then the exposure time. That way I've got everything sorted out, quite easy for me anyway, to work with. You may want to do something else. As you see, you've got plan name, site location and focal length you can enter in there if you wish. And to do it, that it's simply as clicking on one side, clicking the arrow and it appears on the other side. Then you can move it up and down or whatever you like to do and place it where you want. Just remember these are the folder names, and that's how it will do it. So I'll cancel that. Then you've got your actual file names. The system works the same. Select one, move it over, but you now have a hell of a lot of things you can put in the actual file name. Recently it's been added, like the humidity, external temperature, guide quality, your sky quality, and all that can all now go into your file name. Just remember, you could end up with very, very long file names if you do that. There are a number of ones that are required. Unlike before, these can be moved, which is your plan type. You must have. There's two types of plan types. You've got the short one, where if it's a light plan, it'll just use L, or if it's a flats plan, it'll use F, or you can have the long type where it types the full name. So a light plan will be light. The filter you're using needs to be in there, and the image ID needs to be in there. So they're three that you must have, and the rest are up to you. So that's just the way that your actual files will be named. So get out of that one, that's easy enough. The next line is allow spaces in file and folder names. If this isn't checked, instead of a space you'll get an underscore. If it's checked, it will use the spaces. Simple as that, easy to understand. Now if you use PixInsight and use weighted batch processing, checking this box will create friendly names. It'll have the right data. I think I'll just turn on this because this will show you exactly what I mean. No, it doesn't. I thought it might. But the correct data for BP to work properly will be put in the file name. It'll have the things it recognises. Now, if you run multiple instances of APT, you might want to have a custom to-do and checklist path, so that if you're running multiple instances, they can your custom and to-do list and your checklist path are shared. So it saves having multiple listings of your custom, especially your custom and go-to objects. You can have them both on the same, or both running at once on your different instances, rather than having to have separate custom and to-do lists for each instance of APT. And it's just a case of clicking on there and selecting where you want to store it. Oh, what have we got? If you leave it blank, it just gets stored in your APT data directory. Now, in your profile directory. Yes. Now for the next part, these are just a sample of what you actually would get. This would be the path that I'd get: the camera number, the camera, the scope, object, lights, the filter, and how many seconds. So that's what mine would appear like, and the other one is of course the name of the file, what it would look like. So that's just to give you a reference to what you're going to be seeing. Now next, down the bottom here, we have the export log file. If you're having problems, you might be asked to post your log file. You can either do a copy directly from your APT data directory, but if you actually have APT running at the time, this allows you to export a log file up to the point of time you export the file, and it's just a case of clicking on it and picking where you want it to store. So that's what that one is. Now backup settings, this allows you to do two types of backup. The top one is your main settings only, and this isn't only the settings in the setting tab here, but any settings you've got on other tools in APT, it will back them up. A master backup backs up not only your main settings, but it will also your to-do, custom, and your checklists will be backed up as well. That's the only difference between the two of them. So the main settings is probably the most important one if you need to back them up, and it's not a bad idea to back them up occasionally. So I'm just going to cancel out of that. Then you've got restore settings. This is two different ways of doing this. Yes, because I'm not going to actually do it. APT, when you start, creates a restore point from your previous sessions, so you can go through at any point. You know, if you have a problem, something goes wrong this time, you might want to go back a couple of restore points to do it, or if you've made your own backup, you can use other backup files, and when you click on that, you'll just browse to the file you want. But there's automatic backups and another file, so that depends on what you need to do. I'll cancel that up. I'm not going to restore the settings. And finally, you have the import tooltips. There are people out there who are nice enough to translate the tooltips into various languages. If there's one in your language, you can download the file from APT website and then import the tooltips in your language, which is very handy for some people. It'd be nice if there was a few more people doing them into different languages, but we get what we're given and we will accept it and appreciate it. But that's about it for the main tab. In a second, I'm just going to move on to the CCD tab, so I'll be right back with that one. Okay, onto the CCD tab, and this is for your CCD and CMOS cameras only, so we'll just run through it in here. Now, these first three settings for if you have a color camera, generally you can set most of this when you do your original connection to your camera in the camera connection tab, but it's also here so you can do it. Now, if you want to do a color fits preview, you need to debayer the image, so you check that. You need to select the RGB filter or the Bayer filter that your camera uses. You'll have to find that one out and make sure you're using the right one. And then you have the option to store the Bayer pattern in your fits header. What this does is it allows you to have a monochrome preview, but still store the correct Bayer pattern. So you need to make sure you've still got the right Bayer pattern selected. So I'll uncheck that because I've got a mono camera set up in here. Location in fits. If you ever share your fits files, especially with people you don't directly know, it may be a good idea to disable the location being put in your fits file. Otherwise they might be able to find you. If and you don't want strangers knocking on your front door. But that's an optional one up to the user. I don't really share my fits with people I don't know, so I don't worry about it myself, but it's up to you. Auto connect your camera is pretty simple. Yes, you do. No, you have to click connect when you start APT. If you're having any problems with your CCD camera over time, may need to have higher compatibility. You just check that box. It may help, it may not too. Some cameras, probably older ones, have the driver reports the incorrect minimum exposure length. By checking this box, it disables that and may help you get your flat files and that you might need. Really, these sort of ones you should only check if you need them. Auto-populate the CCD profile. That's just basically on your Tools tab in the Object Calculator over here. It just fills in the details down here. It saves you doing it if you change cameras or whatever. It will automatically get filled in for you. So there's nothing wrong with having that. Remember binning and gain, so that in between sessions on your camera tab here and that, it will remember whatever binning and gain you have set down here. Between sessions. Otherwise, every time you restart APT, it will reset these to defaults. Manage gain, and this is to deal with a few places where there is gain set, like in your filter wheel here. You can have a gain setting. These aren't the right ones, of course, but if you have them set with this, if this is turned off, those sort of settings are ignored and you'll have to set the gain manually each time. So manage gain, I'd leave that turned on. Then you have your advanced CCD settings. Really, you shouldn't need to play with these. Don't use the top one unless you really know what you're doing and you know you need it. The other one is you'd look at would be the QHY live view fix if you're having problems with QHY and live view. But disable fits auto orientation. Some cameras need that to work properly, so you don't worry about it. And you include the row order keyword and the row order to bottom up. that row order's not an old, well, not so much new, but it's a keyword that sometimes gets mucked up by some programs, so you might not want to do that, but set it to bottom up. But you really only need to touch these at all, probably if you're having the live view fix. The others I wouldn't touch at all. So that's in that one. Cancel on that. Okay, the next couple have to do with your color cameras, and it's the scaling factor for the red and the blue channels. Green stays fairly constant, so you can scale the red or blue to be brighter or dimmer or whatever you like. It's just to get your colors looking a bit better if you need to. The next one is the auto stretch factor on your histogram, Alt H, and when you hit auto stretch, it will stretch it in a particular way. I better select an image. There we go. Oh, that's terrible. So if you're using that auto stretch and you find it's too bright or too dark, you will need to change this. It does not take much to change it. The values are between 0 and 0 and 1, and only small increments, and you'll need to reload an image to see the effect it has on it. So you change that, click OK, and reload the image. But that's just to make your automatic histograms basically what you want them to be. Now, CCD limit binning to depends on what binnings your camera can handle. Some have the ability to handle silly binning levels, and you can just limit the binning down to something more reasonable. The cooling delta, this is used by your warming and cooling aids. It's just a point where it says, okay, you can stop the cooling or warming when you're this close to the desired temperature. Now, it doesn't stop the cooling getting to what your temperature is, or the warming getting to what exactly your temperature is, but it just tells it can turn itself off from doing that. So that's something you might want to do. 0.6 is fine. Some cameras, especially older CCDs, might need this to go up to 1 degree. So just be warned on that, otherwise they won't, because they can't handle the decimals. Stop initial CCD auto cooling. Most CCD cameras, when you connect to them, will automatically start cooling, and it's just a straight cooling. Bang, we're going to go down to that temperature. Not the best way to cool your CCD. It's better to use cooling aid. So by enabling this, it will actually stop the cooling. It won't turn the cooler off, it will just hold it at the current temperature. And then you use cooling aid, which is a better step-by-step down to the cooling. Some older cameras require you to pause cooling during the image read, otherwise it can interfere with the read of the image, and you might want to check that if you've got a camera like that. Open cooling aid on camera connection. Well, if you have a cooled camera and you're going to be using it, you may as well leave that turned on. It's just so when the camera gets connected, cooling aid pops up automatically. Now this use external sensor or focuser temperature for the warming aid. You click that and it'll just get the current temperature from your sensor and then try to get it warmed up to an appropriate temperature using that one. It just gives it a current target rather than having to figure it out for yourself. Then you have your warming aid target offset. This is how close you want to get to the current temperature that you are for the warming to go. 5 to 10 degrees is fine. Won't hurt your camera only going up that close. It's just so you don't have to get completely to the ambient temperature for it to stop the warming. So you can set that at 5 or 10 degrees, that'll be fine. Check camera temperature on plan start. So if you've got a cooled camera and you're cooling it right down, it just checks to make sure that it's cooled enough to what temperature you set on the next line to be before it starts an imaging plan. Basically, if you set this and you try and take an image before it reaches that level, or start a plan before it reaches that level, it will warn you that you haven't reached your temperature. Are you sure you want to start? And then you know what temperature is the maximum you would accept for that temperature. Camera name can be whatever you like. This is a simulator camera, so just named it SimCam, and as you can see, it comes up down the bottom here, the SimCam, and it's a mono camera. So that's just what that is. Otherwise, if you leave this blank, it'll just show the default name reported by the camera or the driver. So that's what that one is. And finally, the reset image ID. If you notice when we did the name parts for your files on the main screen, one of the required ones is the image ID. This is just a counter for how many images your camera has taken. It's fine if you want to reset it, it doesn't really matter, unless you're naming your files the same every time. So what happens, and keeping them in the same folder, of course, because what will happen is if you get two files that are named the same and you reset the image ID, you'll get a clash with the file names. So just be careful with that. It has more to do with how your files are named, whether it's going to have a real effect, but it just resets the counter. And that's it for the CCD tab. So next we're off to the summary tab. I'll be right there in a second. Okay, this part of your settings will be pretty quick. There's not much in here, but basically this tab controls what happens on your summary tab here. I'll just do the bottom ones first. You can select which sections to display or which ones not to display. That's up to you. Easy enough. Uncheck it, it's not displayed. Check it, it's displayed. The one that I haven't got checked here and I don't like using it is the tab auto redirection. And what that does is if you mouse over one of the appropriate sections, say the camera section here, what it does is it changes the view to the camera tab. So then you can go do things on your camera tab, and when you move it off, it goes back to the summary tab. Good idea, but I find it annoying if I accidentally put my mouse over it and that happens. So that's a personal choice. You can give it a try, see what you think of it, but that's basically it for this section. So you just pick whichever sections you want displayed and whether you want to automatically redirect when you go over one of the sections there and open the tab that's associated with it. That's it for this one, so we'll be right back with temperature and sky. Okay, so now onto the temperature and sky tab. We start out pretty basic, what you want your temperature displayed in, Celsius or Fahrenheit. Select which one you like. That's simple enough. Now the next two boxes are for if you're doing things manually. At the start of the night when you focus your scope manually, you'll go into your Tools tab and set a focus mark. So that just tells you what temperature it was, tells APT what temperature it was when you last did a focus. Then what you do is you pick from the list whatever temperature change you want for when you want to do a refocus. So you might pick, say, 2 degrees. Okay, so what'll happen there is when temperature changes 1 degree, your temperature reading at the top here will start flashing. So that's what'll happen there. Once it reaches 2 degrees, the change you've set here, this will start flashing with a nice bright box around it and everything else, so it's quite noticeable. And then you'll also get messages in your log panel reminding you it's time to refocus. The first warning comes at half of whatever you set. So if you set 4 degrees, the warning will come at 2. Set 6 degrees, it'll come at 3, etc., etc. So that's what that does. It's just a warning if you're doing manual focusing, it's time to prepare or to do your refocus. And of course, once you've finished your refocusing, again hit the set focus mark to reset the temperature for your system, to APT to know when to warn you again. The dew point one works a similar way. If you've got an external sensor that does your dew points, you set when you want it. When it gets halfway there, it will start flashing and warning you that your dew point is getting closer. So prepare to turn on your heaters or turn on your heaters. And again, when it gets to that mark or below it, it will start flashing nice and bright and throwing up messages in the log. So that's what that one does. Of course, you need an external sensor for that one. How long before you need to set this depends on your gear, your telescope and the dew heater and how effective it all is. You'll have to experiment with that. But that's if you're using manual control, so you're not turning your heaters on too early when they don't need to be on. So that's what that one is. Then the next two are calibration ones for your external sensor. What this does is allows to, if you know that your sensor is off by a couple of degrees one way or the other, you can use this to adjust it so it's giving you the right temperatures, and that's all it is. If it's it's 2 degrees hotter than what it's saying, it's 2 degrees hotter than what it is, you just set in -2 and it will take that off the reading to display the correct temperatures. And the same with humidity. If you know it's getting the humidity wrong, then you can calibrate that as well so it gets you the correct readings. Now the next couple of sections, this is for external sensors that have native drivers built into APT, which is temper, hum, temper, or USB dew point. If you have them, select the appropriate one, and hopefully it'll work. There are a few problems, especially with temper, hum. They seem to change every time they do an update, so you may have a bit of fun getting that working. You just need to find the right DLL to get it to work. If you go onto the user guide for external sensors, it's explained in there. If you've got the newly supported ASCOM sensors, it doesn't really matter what you set here, it will be fine. Now if you're going to be doing sky quality, whether it's manually or with a connected device, you'll need to enable the sky quality tracking. You turn that on, you will need to restart APT when you do it, and what that does is it adds this sky quality here onto your status tab, and so you can either enter or automatically have connected your various things, your various readings to be used in files and FITS headers and things like that. So that's what that does. You need to enable that if you want to have access to this. The sky quality metrics, this is for manually entering your data, whether it's through an SQML from Unihedron, which doesn't connect to the computer, or you're using just totally manual entries. This is just what you use to determine what you're going to enter in the sky quality over here. So basically you have, if you're using MPSAS, the magnitude per square arc second, that'll probably come from a meter like the SQML, so you just manually enter that value in there. Naked eye limiting magnitude, this is old school stuff. It's basically you go outside, you look up at the sky and find the dimmest star you can see, determine which star it is and what magnitude that star is. That becomes your limiting magnitude, and if you've got that, you put that value in here and it will read whatever you're doing. So if I enter say I'm in a good sky and say I can see a magnitude 7 with my naked eye, 7, enter, and it will fill in the appropriate details. So that's what that one's for. That's for manually entering your details. The following ones here, the Eagles and the Unihedron ones here, have built-in support for their native drivers, and you select whichever one you have. On the Eagle, which one of the eyes you're using, the front one or the rear one. So that's them. If you're using the newly supported ASCOM ones, they will automatically enter the details in here anyway. So that's how that works, and that's it. Easy enough on your temperature and sky. So in a moment we're going to go over to the location one. Okay, so now we're at the location tab. It's pretty straightforward really. Basically you start out by selecting which hemisphere you're in, north or south. I'm sure you pretty much know where you are. Next you have the choice of enabling daylight savings automatically or doing it manually. I have no problems with it doing auto. The only time I don't know whether it works properly or not is if you do it on a night, if you're imaging on a night where the daylight savings starts or ends. So that depends on whether you have daylight savings at your location, and it's up to you whether you turn it on. It can cause real problems if you don't have it on auto. You've got to remember to go in and change times and everything else in your computer to get it to work. Not very good, but some people do that. Next, you have various locations. You can set up to 20 locations in here. So if you travel around a bit and you've got regular places you can go, you can set them all up in here, and it will store the information. And basically all that is going in, giving it a location name, entering the appropriate details, and it will store them as that location. So I'm going back to not home. Then you need to enter your longitude and latitude. Pretty basic. If you use decimal formats and you're in the southern hemisphere, don't forget to put a negative. You can also set them in the longer format, but once you do that, you'll have to make sure you set your correct hemispheres, north, south, east and west, to get that to work. But like I said, I find it easy just to use the decimals. It works for me. And don't worry, I call this not home because these are not my home. If you try and go to these locations, you're going to find yourself getting a very long swim back to shore, if you can make it. Then, of course, you've got your approximate elevation, how far you are above sea level. Your normal time zone, not your daylight savings one. So I'm +10 because I'm east of the prime meridian. If you're west of it, in the US or whatever, you'll enter a negative number there instead. Now, Astro twilight offset. If you're narrowband imaging, you can often keep imaging past Astro twilight, and this is just an offset. It's used in things like session crafts and plans and that, where you've nominated Astro twilight to do something. This will be added or subtracted, subtracted at the beginning of the night or added at the end of the night to what the normal Astro twilight time is. So if you're doing narrowband, it can just give you that extra 15-20 minutes of imaging if it's capable at your location. Your air mass limit. This is a limit to how much, or basically it's your elevation above the horizon. The air mass is basically an air mass of 1 is looking straight up at the zenith. So you're looking through one atmosphere of the sky. As you get closer to the horizon, you're looking through more and more atmosphere to reach outer space, so it increases your air masses. How low down you want to go depends on you. I sometimes go a bit lower than this. Just be warned that whatever you set that at, if you want to image an object that doesn't get to that height that night, and you apply a filter for what's imageable tonight or whatever in Object Browser, it will not show up in that list because it won't reach your air mass limit. So just remember that little one. This figure's used in a number of places. Some of the settings in Sessioncraft and that will use this figure. You can change it in there, but that's by default what it will use. Then you have the option if you're far north or far south. I'm not far enough south to use it, but you can use nautical twilight instead of Astro twilight. So what it'll do, if you've got areas where you have very long twilights, you can actually get it to replace the readings for Astro twilight with nautical twilight simply by checking that button. It depends on your location, so it may be good to you or maybe not. Pardon me. Now this is for synchronizing your location with various things. You can have it that you only use your location in APT. You can import your location from your mount drivers if you want to do that, or you can export them to your mount drivers if you want to do that. It depends on where you want to change your settings. If you're going to import them, you may need to make sure you go into your mount driver and it's got the correct location. If you want to export them, then make sure these are right and it will send them to your mount driver. Just note that some drivers you need to go in and work in the driver settings so it will enable it. I know with EQ ASCOM you need to set up your driver to accept site rights. So I can export my location. I like changing things just in here. It saves me mucking around, and so I export it, but I've also set up my driver to be able to accept those coordinates so it's got the right coordinates on the mount. The next one is to export time to ASCOM. This is export the time to your driver. I know it doesn't work with EQ ASCOM, so I don't bother enabling it, but if your mount accepts it, you can send the PC time to the mount. I just leave that unchecked because my mount gets the time from my computer anyway. And the last one is to show your location on the main screen, and that's just this part up the top up here, next to the profile you're using. It will display your location. So that's all that one is there. You can enable that. And that's it for the location screen. I hope that you all understand that. And we'll be back very, very shortly for the scope and focuser, which will take a bit more. So the scope and focuser page, especially the focuser side of it, sometimes confuses people, but we'll just run through it here and see how we go. The first option is pretty basic. Do you want to auto connect the scope when you start APT? Yes or no? Auto hide the meridian flip clock. This is your meridian flip clock on the left over here, and it just, if a mount isn't connected, then it won't be displayed. It'll only be displayed when a mount is connected. Above horizon, check before go to. Probably a good one to have checked just to make sure your target isn't below the horizon when you try and go to it. Pretty sensible one to have. If you're an LX200, a Meet LX200 compatible mount, you need to check this one. Not something I've ever had to worry about, of course. Low level pause after go to. Now some mounts can actually report the move being finished prior to actually reaching the location, and you can set a time in seconds here that you'll wait to make sure the mount has actually finished its move. So that can be a good one to have going. I think by default I enter in about 5 seconds. It adds that 5 seconds to a move, but I'd rather make sure the mount's stopped before I start trying to do anything. Now on your gear tab you have your buttons for going north, south, east and west, and you have your speed button here. You can leave it at the default settings, or you can define your own speeds here. I find the default settings are a bit slow, so when I do mine, you have the fast speed, which is arc minutes, and arc seconds for the slow speed. I just bump them up a little bit, but that's up to you if you use those buttons for moving your mount around. Scope name can be whatever you like. You can tell you exactly what the telescope is, or you could use just a pet name for it. It really doesn't matter. This information will also be included in file names and things like that, so whatever you set here is whatever you like to have there. Now the mount tracking watchdog, and what that does, it monitors your alt as up here and makes sure it's changing correctly. If it doesn't seem to be moving right, it will start flashing to warn you that there's something going on, your mount isn't moving correctly. So that's what the mount tracking watchdog is. If you have a Mead mount, you may need to use a tracking fix for it if it's not tracking properly. Basically some older Mead mounts can't report that tracking is on, and that's just a fix for it if that happens. A new one we have is unpark to a location. So you set an alt as where you want to unpark to, so when you hit unpark, it will move to that location. Very handy if you'll have a home observatory and you want to move to a certain spot where you can see the sky when you unpark it, or if you have to park your mount, or you at a certain angle to get it inside your roof or something, so that you just hit unpark and it will move to the location where you want it to go to. Another new option is stopping the tracking on a go to plus failure. This is optional. It just stops the mount, stops tracking if your go to plus fails. Whether you want that or not is up to you. Otherwise it'll just continue doing what you had it doing before. So that's a personal choice. I don't know yet. I haven't decided which way I'm going to go. The next one, pause guiding on focus and move. This is a must if you have an off-axis guider. You can just imagine what the guiding is going to be like if your focus is moving in and out with a off-axis guider. If you're using a guide scope, separate guide scope, this isn't such a big issue and you generally wouldn't worry about it, but it is a must to pause the guiding on focus and move. Then you have your auto connect focuser, again like the scope, that depends on whether you want to do it or not. I enable it, so that's fine there. If you have a mead focuser, or a focuser that also has a humidity sensor built in, this is like the Arduino's base focusers might have one. You check those boxes. Now the next part is dealing with backlash. Make a final inwards move. Now this is probably the simplest method to deal with most backlash. What you do is you enable a final inwards move, set a big number for that final inward move, so that any time you change direction on your mount, on your focuser, so you've been moving in, then you decide you want to move back a bit, it will actually move whatever distance you want plus this out and then move into the position. It isn't a bad way to overcome most backlash. So that goes there. This reverse focuser moves. This confused me. I wondered why that was happening. Basically, it doesn't reverse your focuser moves overall. It only reverses the focuser moves if you're using the arrow tabs on your focuser screen here. So just be aware of that. It doesn't totally reverse the focuser moves. It only reverses it on these arrows. If you need to actually reverse the focuser direction, you need to do that within the driver itself. I got caught out by that one, and I had to ask Ivo what the heck was going on, and that's what I found out. Now, if you want to have more control over your backlash, I don't know if this is really more control. You need to do a lot of work to get this right. You can actually set how much backlash your mount has in each direction. So leaving it at 0 means there's no correction. If you set it in these, it will try and correct for those ones when it moves in separate directions. I don't bother with it really now. I'll go through it in another video. I've already done one video on doing it, but I think I'll do another in-depth video on it and talk about it in there. Okay, so you have use APT position counter. Some older backlash, sorry, I'm on the wrong part here. Basically, you hide the backlash moves from the focuser position counter. So basically, it won't take any of these backlash settings you have into account in what's displayed here. So that's what that does. It'll just display what it would be without the backlash corrections. So that's up to you, whether you want that or you want the actual position that's in display. Now, flop correction, this is for your Smith Castlegrains and Muscatovs. Those ones, the mirrors in them can flop around as your mount changes position, and this is just to enable to use these backlash sessions. You can't use backlash if this is enabled to start with. You need to set it up so you can work out a value it needs to move to compensate for the flop. It uses the inwards outwards settings there, but you only usually need to set one of them. But you need to work out how much you need for your backlash to compensate for your flop, and then enable that. And that, like I said, that's only on SCTs and Macs. If you're running an older focuser, it might not have a position counter. This next one enables that, so it will emulate a position counter. If you have a permanent setup and you're emulating the position, you can set it to remember the position it was set at, and you can set the size of the step for each emulated position. So that's it there. That'll set that up. And finally, we have backlash aid. That gets a separate video on its own later on, so I'll just leave that for now. But it is a tool you can try and use to calculate your backlash on your focuser. So that's scope and focuser done for now. Back very shortly with the filter. Okay, now onto the filter wheel tab. pretty basic really, except when it comes to manual filters. I'll cover that a bit in a second. Okay, so basically you have your, if you've got a filter wheel, you name your filters, quite simple. The focus offset, you need to calculate how many steps of your focuser you need to change when you switch filters, depending on how accurate you want to be, unless you're refocusing every filter change. That sort of negates the need for these. But if you don't want to refocus on every filter change, you need to make sure you get these set right. You can either use autofocus aid or do manually calculate the distances. The gain is the default gain used for that particular filter. This is overridden by ones you might have in your plans or whatever, but if you don't define a gain, the gain in here is what will be used for that particular filter. Generally I'm shooting at the same gain for whatever I use, but that's what that is. AF exposure, this is the how long an exposure to take for automatic focus. These don't need to be as high as some people think, but you also can't have them too low. It will depend on what you're using to do your autofocus, whether you're using inverse power or HFD. It will affect it. HFD generally need a slightly longer exposure than using inverse power, but that's just trial and error to get it right. Once you get it, you set it in here. Next one is your plate solving exposure. Again, these don't have to be as long as people think. The plate solving software is very good at removing the background and bringing out the stars. Again, it depends on what you're using for your plate solving, and you'll need to experiment what works for you. The last column here, this is if you've got a flat panel and you want to do, and it can be automatically changed. This is a flat panel ASCOM supported or native driver supported one that you want to use. You set the brightness levels for each filter in here for the level of light you want to use. So that'll be covered more in a later detail as well. I'll get back to it when I do that video. And then you have the last 4 boxes or 5 boxes down here. Moravian Instruments filter wheel, if you have one, obviously you check that. Do you want to connect the filter wheel on startup? Check that or not. If you have a manual filter wheel, you need to check that one, or you've got a filter drawer, because you can set it up to work with it. That's mainly for naming of files and stuff to go in the FITS headers and that. So if you've got a manual filter wheel, you can do that. You can pause for a manual change, so if you need to change filters with your filter drawer or your manual wheel, you can do that. And check your filter wheel is connected on startup of a plan. Now the big one here is manual filter wheels. The others pretty much straightforward. You set up a manual filter wheel very similar to where you set up your automatic one. You'll put the filter name here. You don't need to worry about, of course, a focus offset. There won't be one. Oh, there could be if you're using multiple filters, but if you're only using one filter, you don't need to worry about it. You might be using one on a one-shot color camera, but you need to do the focus offsets you might want to do, the gain to use with that particular filter, and again these other settings, you do the settings the same there. If you're using a manual filter wheel or multiple filters with a filter drawer, you can set up exactly the same for all of them, same way as you set up an automatic one. But when it comes to the manual one, besides what you already have checked here, the auto connect or the check for connection, you tell it you've got a manual filter drawer, and if you're going to be using multiple filters, you need to set pause for manual change. So what that is basically you put your filter in that you're using, tell it what filter you're using in your plan or whatever, and then run your plan as normal. And when it comes time to change a filter, if you want to change filters during a session, APT will stop, wait for you to change the filter. It'll have a pop-up, please change your filter, click OK, and then it'll start imaging again. So the filters are set up exactly the same as for an automatic wheel. It's just that APT will wait for you to finish. And the important thing is to remember that even with a manual filter wheel, you will need to connect it. So you can set it to auto connect, but it needs to tell APT you are using filters. That's an important one that some people miss. And that's it. That's the filter wheel done and dusted. Not much else to say on it. I'll be back shortly and we'll talk about the sound. Okay, the sound tab is pretty straightforward. First up you have the box which turns on and off sound notifications. I leave that off. I don't listen to the sounds really. If I do want to have sounds, I just use the little icon up the top up here, which will turn sounds on and off for as long as I want it. Next you have the display of what the files are and what does. So a camera connected, you'll have what the event is, a brief description of the event, and what file is used for that event. If you want to edit what's up there, you can. So you can create your own sound packs if you like. So basically the first two lines are exactly what you got in these first two columns, and then you can decide what you want to do. You can play the current file.
Camera connected.
So
Camera connected.
I don't know if you can hear that one. You can select a different file from the ones that already exist if you wish. So I could go on and say, instead of that, I'll play, there you go, and you'll see it changes the file name up here
Filter wheel connected
and gives you a different sound. I'll reset that back to what it was. Oh, it doesn't name it the same way it was. Or you can choose your own sounds if you want to by hitting select. What I'll do is I'll go through and I'll put the original sound file up there. So go select, then you will browse to what you want. So I've browsed to this folder here. I want to put this one back at top, and there you go, it's back there. But as I said, as long as you've got the MP3 file in MP3 or WAV format, APT will let you replace this with your totally own file system and sound system. So reset button, of course, resets the particular one. I've done it again, haven't I? I've reset that, so go back and select the one I had. That one there.
Camera connected.
Okay, if someone else makes up a sound file for you, you can import the package. If you make up your own, you can export it, and you can also choose between the male and the female. So male voice, click yes. Settings are imported.
Camera connected.
And so you got the male voice.
Camera connected.
I don't know if many people play around with it, but you can do things with it. I might actually add some sounds for some things I want to be notified of. And then of course you got the global reset. And that's it for the sound one. Next we'll move on to the planetariums. Okay, the planetariums are pretty straightforward. There's 5 that APT supports. CDC, C2A, SkyTech X, HN Sky and Stellarium. Which one you use is up to you, but when they're connected you can do transfer data between the two of them. You can get locations from your planetarium, and you can send information about where your scope's pointing to them. So that's a good thing to have. So you can use your planetarium to decide on a target, send that target information to APT and go on and get onto target. Now all you need to do is select the one you want. If you have none, just select none and it won't try anything. If you select one of the others, when APT starts it will try to connect to it. If you don't have it running, you just get an error message saying you couldn't connect. It's not an issue. If you don't want to have it running all the time, you don't have to. It just tells you you can't connect to it. It's not a big concern. Later in the night you might decide you want to connect to it, and you just start the program and it will automatically start working with APT. The IP addresses you won't need to change. They're just local host, so your local computer, that's a default address for that. The ports what I've used works fine. I've never used CDC, so I don't know what port it might need there, or if 0 works for it. I don't know, but never had to change that. The only difference you have between them is in APT you can set up your sensors and your scopes you're using, multiple ones if you need to, and you can set a default one for your profile. Generally, in Stellarium, the first sensor you set up will be 0, so this one's my 294mm, and your first telescope will be 0. Depending on what telescope I'm using, and if I've changed the camera, in each profile I'll set up the sensor and telescope to work with what I've got. Now this would be one I'd be tempted be using if I'm using my 294mm with my Sharp Star EDF 61, so that'd work with that, because my second telescope I have connected in Stellarium is that telescope, and you need to subtract one number from it to get it to work. But that's it for planetariums. You can either have one or not have one. It's up to you. I leave it off when I'm running in the simulator mode, simply because I don't have it running. Bingo. Back very shortly, and we'll take a look at the Advanced tab. And finally, the Advanced tab to finish this one off. Start on the left over here, of course, plan start delay. I don't know why you'd want to use it, but you can delay when a plan starts. Setting it to 0 is no delay, of course, but what it is, if you set a figure here after you hit the start button to start a plan on the camera tab, it will delay starting the plan however many seconds you put there. LV stack count, that's to do with preview effects, which we'll go in at another time. It's just a number of images to use in the LV stack, so I'll explain that when I do that part. PC free space, and a warning if you get down to whatever limit you set here. Same with camera low space on your card in your camera if it gets too low. It's not really an issue if you just copy everything straight to the computer rather than storing it on the card. Then you got your powers, so your camera battery limit and your PC limit warnings that you'll get, so they're just warnings that you're running out of power. The trigger delay, the audio trigger delay, if you're using one of the shutter release cables on your EOS camera, you might need to delay the trigger. That's just the time you use for that. It's something that probably isn't used at all nowadays, but possibly you have it. Extreme EOS shutter delay. I'm going to have to speak to Ivo for this, because I don't think it exists in APT anymore. It used to be something that was introduced 8 or 9 years ago. I don't know if it's there. I'll have to talk to Ivo. I have no idea what it is. If you use Astro Tortilla, this is basically just the highest ISO you want it to use. That's pretty simple. Your default stretches for auto stretch on your DSLR histogram, you can change the setting for that if it's too bright or too low. 0 is minimum, 1 is maximum. So if you can just adjust this a little bit to see if you can get a better image if you use the auto stretch. Now if you run multiple profiles, when you start APT, it was then a drop down list of your profiles for you to select the one you want to start, and this timeout here is just how long it stays on the screen before it starts the selected profile that's there. Pretty simple with that one. Your new image folders after midnight or after midday, I do recommend using after midday, simply because you don't want to get halfway through a night and then have your images all going into a new folder. It's up to you, but that's probably the best way to do it, by having it after midday. Bigger UE fonts on XP and Vista only. If you're not running them, it doesn't really matter. You can't select it if you wanted to. Advanced bias and flat frames. If you select this, you can manually set your times for your flats and your bias in your plans. If you don't have this checked, your DSLR will use the AV setting to determine its own flat speeds, and the biases will be the maximum shutter speed for that particular camera, so generally 4,000 or 8,000, 1/8,000th of a second. With this unchecked, for your bias frames for your CCD and CMOS cameras, that's just basically the highest speed it can handle. So that's what that one does. If you want to set the times and everything yourself, check it. If you don't, uncheck it. Simple. Auto connected DSLR, so do you want to auto connect when you have a DSLR connected? If you're using DSLR, it's not a bad idea. Remember image effects, these are your preview effects up here, or down here now. Whether you remember them between sessions, like I said, that's another video later on. You can now convert your RAW files from your digital cameras to TIFF files if you wish. Just remember, these are stored on your hard drive. If you're copying your files from your camera to your hard drive as well, you're going to be using twice the space to copy these across, so just remember you will take extra space doing that. Don't remember object name. With this checked, when you restart APT, the object name won't be remembered. I have that on anyway, so it doesn't remember it, because sometimes I'm not shooting the same object. That's up to you again. Asks for object name. When you hit the start button for a plan, it'll pop up to ask you for the object name that you're going to be imaging. That's all that one is. Don't sync DSLR camera clock. By default, when you plug a camera into APT, it will sync the clock in the camera with the PC time. You just check this if you don't want it to do that. That's up to you. If you're using remote desktop protocols and you're having problems with your mouse, as you can see, I don't have problems. You can check this. Haven't needed to use it, so it's fine. Determine lens focal length. This is a very handy one if you're using a DSLR with a connected lens, not with a telescope, just with a lens itself. It uses the data from the telescope, from the camera, to determine what the actual focus length you're using. And what that does is, on your Tools tab here in your Object Calculator, it will automatically fill in your focal length for you over here. Very handy. All you need to do is take one image of any type, of any length, and your camera will fill in the details there for you, so you're right. So very good idea if you're using a DSLR and a lens, and it's especially pardon me, handy if you're using a zoom lens and you're not fully zoomed in or fully zoomed out. It will actually determine the correct focal length you're using, which is very good. So if you're using DSLR with camera lenses, I do suggest using that. Wherever I was down here, there we go. Disable Nikon dial check. Sometimes your Nikons will tell you you've got the dial in the wrong position. This disables that check. If you have a Lunatico GNS, which can receive signals to, you've got you install the software on your mobile phone, and it will alert you when you've got a safety issue or an issue with something going on. So if you've got one of them, you can enable the broadcast to it. Disable keys thingy. Because I'm always on a PC, I never use keys thingy anyway, so I disable it. It's up to you. It's just something that you might want or might not want. If you're using a touchpad or a touch screen, you may want to leave it enabled all the time, which would be a good idea. And disable data autocomplete. So when you're filling in information, APT won't try to autocomplete the data you're entering in. And that's it. Finally, I'm done. So that covers all the APT settings in here. There are some we'll loop back and forth between as I move on to other sections of APT, because there are relative parts in here. So we won't see the last of this, but it's enough for this video. I'm going to wish you all very clear skies. Take care, and I will talk to you in the next video. Bye now.